I read about 67 books in 2022, if I counted them right. For my own memory's sake, I wanted to put them into a video, so let me shortly walk you through them one by one, approximately in the same order I read them in. Beautiful World, Where Are You? By Sally Rooney. I got the Finnish translation from my local library in the beginning of the year, and I preferred this novel over Rooney's first two. Despite the smut, I liked the plot and felt it was believable. The Sacred Romance by Brent Curtis and John Eldridge. The first finished Sunday book of the year, this gave another insight on Christianity in today's world. Even though the Finnish translation was a little poor at some points, I enjoyed the read nevertheless. Whiskey in a Teacup by Reese Witherspoon. This was a fun hybrid between a cookbook and a memoir. Reese has become an interest of mine because of her book club, and many of my reads are her recommendations. The School of Essential Ingredients by Erika Bauermeister. This was a short story collection like a warm hug. Group of individuals coming to this Learn to Cook club and learning a lesson of life in the middle. Widen by Laura Malmvaara. I got an audiobook service as a Christmas present from my husband, and this was first of the 3 books I listened there. Widen is a Finnish autofiction novel about an actress whose ex-husband suddenly gets sexual harassment accusations and gets into a media chaos. I wasn't a fan of this one. Erotic Stories for Punjab Widows by Bali Kaur Jawal. This was quite a memorable one, with a very unique storyline about Punjab community living in London. Could have used a bit summarizing, especially with the end. The Guest List by Lucy Foley. Ooh, I disliked this one. I feel like there was so unnecessary much building to the climax, and it was so not worth it. This one was a memorable read because I finished it at the hairdresser's and left the place with plastic red hair when I was hoping for a chrome ginger. Asioita, jotka tekevät kodin by Sarah Carlson. This was a tiny home decorating guide with pretty generic tips, which I really don't remember anything about anymore. The Island of Missing Trees by Elif Shafak. This was a mystical novel taking place in both London and Cyprus. The story was well divided between those places and felt very balanced. Ending felt rushed, otherwise I liked it a lot. Ainoa kotini by Hanna Broterus. This one is a Finnish memoir about a dancer protagonist and her relationship with her body and the people around her. The title is translated My Only Home, which felt appropriate to the themes. I actually listened this one as an audiobook as well and really enjoyed Hanna reading the text herself. Why I No More Talk to White People About Racism by Reni Edgolodge. I wanted to read the new Finnish release because it was kind of popular in the beginning of last year. I found the book a little hard to follow and lacking the common thread. The Group by Christy Tate. One of the best memoirs I've read. Christy's story about group therapy was so unique and still touching on so many common themes: shame, loneliness, and confronting scary things from one's past. In the Flow by Alisa Vitti. I've been super interested in hormonal health, and this is one of the solids. Very informative, though a bit repetitive after reading many of these kinds of books. I don't think I learned anything super groundbreaking with this one alone. The Dutch House by Anne Patchett. A solid literary fiction novel about 2 siblings and decades of their life with this peculiar house. Would recommend it to anybody with a more classic taste. Wasn't very plot heavy. Everything Everything by Nicola Yoon. This was a reread, first time reading in Finnish, which is my first language. A classic YA serious illness story reflects loneliness and falling in love for the first time. The book has many great details which the movie doesn't underline as well. Food, What Should I Eat by Mark Hyman. A practical tool when trying to establish a strong eating routine. The book was divided by nutrient groups and took a very detailed and science-based approach. Not recommended to eating disordered folks. Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. Oof, I disliked this one as well. Some booktuber recommended this and I disagree. Characters were so annoying to me and the story was complicated and not believable enough. The Rose Code by Kate Quinn. This was a chunky one, a historical fiction story about 3 World War II heroines and their messy lives after the war. I enjoyed Quinn's knowledge, nevertheless found the plot would have benefited from a little compressing. Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. One of my favorites during the whole year. This plotline novel about black 20-something nanny and her relationship with the white employee mother touched on so many themes, still being very digestible and believable, even humoristic. This is one of the books I really hope will eventually be translated in Finnish. His Only Wife by Peace Adjo Medi. This was sadder than I imagined at first. I kept hoping for a different turn of events, but it was a tragedy in many ways. I did enjoy the read, and the sadness wasn't all-consuming. Gorgeous cover. Beautiful Outlaw by John Eldridge. John is my favorite Christian writer, and this one was solid quality about Jesus and what he is really described like in the Bible. On Earth, We Were Beautifully Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. Very hipster read, I know. I'm sure the novel was supposed to be more of scenarios than a plot, but it still felt too disorganized to my taste. The Beekeeper of Aleppo by Christy Leftery. This is one of the novels I feel bad criticizing because it touches such a difficult topic of refugees. Nevertheless, I didn't like the writing. It lacked a certain deepness and vulnerability. Amy and Isabel by Elizabeth Strout. This was my first experience of Strout and she made really an impact. The language was so easy to read and the story had details and charm. The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Ooh, such a great one. Very entertaining, very believable. I would have preferred the memoir bits to have an even more significant role and was a bit disappointed that they didn't cover, for example, Evelyn's childhood almost at all. All the details were golden and I loved the TJR World crossovers too. Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. I'm really glad that I bit the bullet and read this one because it was kind of a lot of work. Still, it felt worth it because the stories were captivating and sometimes it's also nice to know what the books are about, what are raved around all over the world. Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb. Such an interesting memoir about a psychologic and her own psychotherapy journey. One of my favorites from 2022. The Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. I really enjoyed this old lady and her story. Life at the convenience store was written delightfully. It felt especially charming to read about a person being content in a non-academic, low-paid job because I was working as a waitress at the time. 10 minutes, 38 seconds in this strange world by Elif Shafak. Strange novel telling a story about the strange world. This was about a prostitute dying and her unconscious going through her memories before fading for good. I was disappointed because I anticipated a more similar experience than with the Island of Missing Trees. Hallitse stressiä by Tarja Nummelin. This is a stress managing self-help book, pretty basic and pretty helpful as an introduction to taking care of yourself. The bit about shame was the best part in my opinion. The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. A BookTok sensation apparently, and the queue at the library was so long. After reading this one, I don't question it though. A captivating story, could have been a bit cringy but wasn't the least. Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. Again, one of my favorites of 2022. Artificial intelligence Clara was a delightful soul and made me very interested to read other books from Ishiguro as well. The Christie Affair by Dina de Gramont. This one is hard to sum up, basically a story about Agatha Christie's husband's mistress. A bit hard to follow, historical point of view was well done. Anatomy by Dana Schwartz. Taking place in Edinburgh, I was sold before even starting this one. I wished it would have been a bit better, maybe focusing more on exploring the historical city. Anyway, I'm really looking forward to part 2 releasing in February. Love and War by John and Stacey Eldridge. My favorite marriage book and a common reread for me. Teaches something new every time. This time especially the structure of the book made more sense than ever, beginning with the everyday challenges and continuing into bigger ones. Defining Decade by Meg J. I remember this feeling informative right after reading, and I even asked my husband to read it, but after 6 months I barely remember what this was about. Most memorable point was the term identity capital, meaning low-paid job or opportunity which will gain you mainly something more valuable than money. Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. Second time reading this modern classic, totally fell in love with this time around. Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I feel like this book belongs to the collection of for historical Hollywood so profoundly. Maybe it wouldn't have been so great as a standalone. Luckily, it isn't a standalone. In Love by Amy Bloom. A memoir about Alzheimer's and euthanasia, not a light one. Written beautifully. Parisuhteen tunnelogot by Kimmo Takanen. A self-help book about emotional shame locks in romantic relationships. Very helpful and written in very kind way, not pointing with the finger to those others who have imperfect coping mechanisms. The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. My first fantasy read in years and years. Wasn't really memorable for me. I feel like the world and the characters were kind of clichés at many points and lacked a certain depth to them. The Last Thing He Told Me by Laura Dave. Another favorite from the year. A mystery taking place in Western United States, refreshing and quite believable. Both the movie and the Finnish translation are coming this year, and I'm eagerly waiting for them. Pakumatkalla by Aina Huilea. As someone who desperately wants to have her own one-life experience, it was so interesting to read experiences from the road. Loved it. Could have been twice as long. It Ends With Us by Colin Hoover. My first experience with Coho didn't make me a fan. A difficult story to write, to be fair, I just didn't enjoy the end result. Maybe in Another Life by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This one was my first TJR apart from the historical Hollywood ones, which I've adored so much. I feel like this wasn't as believable as Daisy, etc. Still entertaining though. Overall message that the love of your life is the one you choose and commit to was something I really agree with, and which is quite rare in chick lit. Effortless by Greg McKeown. Another self-help book, not very memorable one. One thing that stuck was that if possible, remove a step completely when not doing a big project or designing practical habits or spaces. That was pretty useful. The Help by Catherine Stockett. My favorite novel. This was maybe the third reread, and I plan to do it every year or so. Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. Atmospheric mini-novel or collection of stories about this magical cafeteria where you can travel back in time if you return before the coffee gets cold. Absolutely worth reading. Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. A Christian fiction piece retelling the Bible story of Hosea. Very touching at times, very cringy at other times. The Summer I Turned Pretty by Jenny Han. Yes, I read this one because all of the hype. Was it worth a read? Maybe, maybe not. I found Lara Jean's story to have more depth to it. I also loved those movies. You and Me on Vacation by Emily Henry. As promised, perfect balance between literary fiction and romance. Grumpy meets Sunshine is not my trope though. A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. I read this one based on a recommendation, and I don't think I would have picked it up otherwise. ACOTAR wasn't my piece of cake. I hated the plot twist in the middle and really thought it went downhill from there. The Wonder by R.J. Palacio. One of the few children's books I read, and it was so worth a read. The themes of belonging and courage were complex enough for adults as well. A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. I decided to give ACOTAR a second chance, and it was so not worth my time. The Woman on the Window by A.J. Finn. I am not a thriller person, so this wasn't my jam. The protagonist's background was immensely tragic, and the plot didn't feel believable as a whole. The Witch and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. I decided to return to Narnia when I found some of the books at the primary school library where I work. Lovable characters, magical setting, and symbolic story all felt sweet. Inheritance Games by Jennifer Barnes. Another Rachel Catherine recommendation, a YA mystery where Avery inherits a huge fortune from a guy she doesn't know. The details were fun, the big picture was kind of messy. Suorittajamieli by Emilia Kujala. This self-help book about the completer's mind hit so close to home. Worth even rereading. Opetuslapsi by Kari Hotakainen. I read this one for Workplaces book club. Wouldn't for sure picked it up otherwise, even though I am a Finnish literature bachelor. A story of a lonely woman and her revenge with loads of black humor, not my piece of cake. Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Worth the wait! I found Carrie Soto's story so relatable and moving, even though I knew nothing about tennis beforehand. I eagerly wait for Finnish translation to get even more layers of the story. A Mission for Meaning by Gabriel Conti. This memoir of the YouTube star Gabe was written in a very authentic way, and I admire the way he talks about Jesus in his life. Maybe not many groundbreaking ideas, still would recommend. Mary Jane by Jessica Anya Blau. November was kind of a back to reading month for me, and this one especially was such a quick read. I fell in love with the atmosphere and had such a throwback feeling with my au pair experience while reading. Prince Caspian by C.S. Lewis. I had no memory of the Narnia stories behind the first book, so this was a fresh read even though I've read it as a kid. Not the greatest one in a series, nevertheless an important piece in the storyline. Resilient by John Eldridge. the new release of Wild at Heart Community, which is my spiritual home away from home. Resilient talks about Jesus coming back and the post-COVID times we all are living. Winnie the Pooh by A.A. Milne. Another primary school bookshelf find. I found this one so charming and sweet. I also learned how similar the vibe is in the Disney adaptation and had some of the lines from the movie spoken out loud in my head while reading, which was fun. Gay Girl, Good God by Jackie Hill Perry. This is a memoir of a same-sex attracted girl and her journey to knowing Jesus. Very much worth the read. Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This was last of the 3 audiobooks I listened, and I am not a huge audio girl. I had so much fun with this one though. Dialogue was so special with all the different narrative voices. Daisy was read by a Finnish artist, Anna Puu, and it made her story all the more believable. Lukupiiri maailmanlaidalla by Frida Skuback. The only original Swedish read of the year was a story set in a Swedish little town with a reading club who tried to solve its unsolved mysteries. I read this one for the workplace book club as well.